What's the biggest red flag you've seen in a job interview? Two things, really. I was interviewing in for a job to work on a new Windows-based spreadsheet a long time ago. The group of people I interviewed with all seemed in fear. That was the first thing. The second thing was that on the way out, talking with HR, they said that they had paid $10,000 to the recruiter to send recruits, and if I left before 1 year, I would have to pay them back $10,000. It would be in my employment contract. You could not pay me enough to work for that place. I never want to talk to them, ever. Next. LOL, that's not how jobs work, but thanks for trying. I was once desperate for a paycheck and set up an interview for a truck washing job. I showed up in my nice clothes only to find that not only were they interviewing 3 candidates at the same time for one open position, but that it was a learning interview, so we would be washing trucks while interviewing. I told them I had to use the bathroom, walked out a bay door, and never looked back. The bathroom's this way. Hey, it's over there. I know exactly where I'm going. Thank you. I have a weird one. The interviewer asked me about my hobbies and I mentioned some typical ones: reading, writing, cooking, etc. He then asked about my writing and I just mentioned I've been working on a novel in my spare time. In my experience, writers make poor engineers, he said. I didn't really know how to respond to that. He elaborated that writers typically think that they will hit it big once they finish their book and don't focus on the job. I assured him that I applied for an engineering job because I wanted to do engineering and that writing was a hobby. Kind of thankful I didn't get that job. It's about getting the job done. Most of our people come in up to an hour early to get everything done. Me. Oh, that's cool. It's nice to have an overtime option available. Them. No. They come in off the clock because the job just can't be done in a shift. Me. Wait. So you expect people to work off the clock? Them. Absolutely. It's about getting the job done even if it's not something that even can be done in the time you're working. Me. LOL. That's illegal. This dude had been working there 20 years and said he'd come in a minimum of an hour early every effing shift and expected everyone working under him to do the same. Sounds like something my dad would say. So I went to a psychoanalysis counselor for an internship interview. I was expecting normal questions. Then he goes, "What do you think of the trees outside?" And I was like, "They are pretty. I like trees." And he was like, "No. Dig deeper." So it was a half-hour interview just digging deeper about trees. Then at the end he just goes, "Okay, goodbye. I need you to leave now." And that was it. I obviously didn't think I got it, but at like 9 PM a week later he called and was like, "I guess we can make this work." And I was like, number. I already got one, thanks. That is kind of fricked up. I'd almost want to take it just to see what kind of weird stuff came next. Went into a job interview for a manager position. Halfway through the interview they said, "I don't think this position is a good fit for you, but we have another exciting opportunity for you to look at." They then said a fancy title: Operations and Statistical Numeric Data Input, and I asked, what does the job entail? I would be filling out TIS reports that wanted low-level data input. I asked about salary. It was half of what they had said for the manager position. I laughed, got up and left. PFFT, I can only fill out TPS reports. Nice try. When I switched jobs earlier this year, I was specifically looking for something that was a remote work from home situation. One interview began with an explanation that they used something similar to test proctoring software for their remote employees and that I was expected to have my webcam on for the full 8 hours so they could ensure nobody seemed distracted. Come the frick on. We're all professionals here. I'm not going to sit there on camera for 8 hours while I work so that you can ensure you're milking every second of productivity out of me. Only the second time in my life I've left an interview early. Yeah, productivity tools are an absolute cancer. I'm 100% remote and I don't have anything on my system. If they wanted to, I would leave immediately. I showed up 10 minutes early in my best suit. They sat me in a room and put on Mighty Joe Young. Over the next 45 minutes, about 20 other people shuffled in for what was apparently a group interview. I was comically overdressed. The owner was an hour late. Upon entry, he didn't ask, but rather told us to smile. The job was supposedly a sales position that also required setting up and breaking down presentations. In reality, it was 2 girls in a small car going door to door and asking to do presentations of a product in rich neighborhoods. Once someone accepted, I, and 4 others, were to show up in a van, which was to be roaming the neighborhood, and the girls would leave to set up more presentations. It was the skeeziest operation I have ever seen. Owner was very adamant about rushing right, and so they didn't have a chance to change their mind. I was 18 and naive, but I still managed to call them out on their massive red flag collection by day 2. Interview was at 10 AM. They made me wait until 10:45 before someone could finally see me. First question they asked me was how I feel about working overtime. They asked me another 2-3 times if I was really sure I was okay with it, which tells me that A, they're going to make me work over a lot, and B, they've had people quit shortly after being hired because this job clearly sucks. When I asked them to describe the work environment culture, one guy says they get at each other's throats sometimes and it's intense, but they're like a big dysfunctional family. No thanks. So I am already part of a large dysfunctional family. I really don't need another one. They wanted us to use an entirely fake resume, claim we worked on projects we didn't. I wish I had realized that was their meaning before I hopped on a plane to meet up with them. This compounded by the fact their office looked half finished, and the second I signed the offer, I'd owe them $25,000 if I quit within 2 years. Immediately screamed get out. They seemed cordial, gave me a day to think about it, even implied they'd help with travel home. Until I decided against signing, then I needed to be out of accommodations ASAP and any offer for fare back home dried up. I spent my last bit of money buying a ticket back home, and I don't regret it one bit. I know I'd be in a worse place now than I am if I had accepted that job. Not so much an interview as a job offer. I was recently divorced and teaching part-time for a technology education company in Wisconsin. They send people in for required training on Excel, that kind of thing. 6 months in, they offer me full-time. I was barely making ends meet, so it looked promising. I read the contract fully. I would have to attend training so I could teach upper-level courses. Think server management instead of Excel. Any time period I was not teaching. Sounds reasonable on its face. They would keep track of the courses I took. If at any point I ended my employment, I would have to pay back the full retail value of any courses I took over the previous 2 years. The retail cost of those classes started at $500 per day, and I was only making $125 per day plus expenses. It was basically signing up for indentured servitude at the risk of my credit rating. This was my introduction to the phrase predatory employment. I said no thank you in the most polite way I could, and started applying for actual developer jobs closer to my kids. Good thing that worked out fast, because I found my schedule diminishing, and my subjects changed to ones way outside my skills and comfort zone. That strikes me as an entirely unenforceable contract clause. The 2 owners had 2 very different ideas of what the open position was going to be doing, and couldn't stop bickering long enough to actually ask me questions. It's the only interview I've ever walked out of before. I interviewed for a private investigation firm when I was 20 and in school. They primarily were trying to catch bars that showed pay-per-view fights or games on more TVs than they were allowed with the contract. I said I'm not allowed in the bar since I'm only 20. Need to be 21. He then asked if I had a fake ID. Why are fake IDs so common in America? I've never seen or knew anyone with a fake ID, and if the government catches you with one you get absolutely fricked. I had applied for a marketing position with a local tech company. A woman called to set up the interview, but a few things seemed a little too vague in the job description. Since I really didn't need the job, I was very direct with her and asked, is this an actual marketing job or is this a sales job that's been given a marketing title? I had run into that a couple times, but usually the job description clarifies it. Her response was, all I can tell you is what is in the job description. So there's the red flag. But because the office was only a block away from where I was already working, I figured I would go and entertain myself. Anyway, to make a long story short, I was right. It was a sales job, and to make matters worse, it was probably the slimiest company I have ever applied for, and I once went to an Amway meeting, so that should say something. I was looking for something part-time while my toddler is in daycare. Decided to do an interview at a place that had 10-12 listed for hourly. Sandwich shop. Of course, it was only 10 and no way would they negotiate. Okay, fine. Then, they decided after giving me the paperwork that I would be expected to hand over my phone to them during work hours. They wanted my daycare to call the store during an emergency number. I don't care. No one is getting my phone. If anything happened in store or with my kid at daycare, I need phone. I declined at that point. I get wanting workers to be productive, but my property stays on me. This is a ridiculous sandwich shop. I worked at one all through high school. We all had flip phones out. I interviewed with a certain big satellite tech company for a crappy L2 tech support job. When the hiring manager took me for a tour of the rest of the team building, every room we went into there was a sudden attitude shift when everyone shut up, straightened up, stared at their screens, stopping idle chat amongst themselves, etc. I realized basically he was a crappy manager from everyone's body language of the current employees. I was interviewing for a local gas station. The pay was great. I went to the interview and woman immediately said, "Good, you're not a millennial." I am, in fact, a millennial. I don't hire millennials. They are lazy and entitled. We chatted for a while and somehow she got into explaining how she punishes employees. She would schedule them for shifts they didn't want, save them tedious tasks, cut hours, etc. That was a big nope. I'm glad she was stupidly honest. We're really looking for someone who can grow with the company. That is, you're too old. After hearing that phrase several times, I said screw it and I retired early. This hits close to home. For my last successful interview, I dyed my hair slightly and shaved off my mustache. It made me look 10 years younger. "We can't pay you, but you'll have equity in the company." I said thank you for your time, but I didn't mean it, and left. 50% of 0 is still 0 and I got bills to pay. Temp job that ends in 2 months but recruiter says it'll definitely be extended. Then on the job interview they say here's the scoop. We've got about 2 months left to finish such and such for year's end and need help with that. Our next step is a 3-hour test followed by another round of interviews for a $14 HR tech support position that amounted to telling people how to unjam printers. We're like a family here. We follow an effort-based reward system. We will require you to complete training which the company will partly reimburse. Initial salary might seem low but you'll learn much more from bonuses. The infamous "we're like a family here," which just translates to "you're gonna be overworked, underpaid and underappreciated. So yeah, frick you, you're hired. K thanks." Okay, buckle up. I interviewed for a high school teaching position. As part of the interview, they had me teach a lesson to a group of students so they could see my teaching style. It didn't go great. For one thing, there was a group of students who refused to participate at all. They spent the entire time whispering to each other, wouldn't respond when I called on them. Later the principal told me that these students did not speak English and asked how should you have adapted your lesson for a bilingual classroom. I had not been told to prepare for a bilingual classroom, but the principal assured me that even though I did a poor job, their training program could turn me into an effective teacher. The whole thing felt like a setup to make me feel incompetent, which I did, and then present the job as a way to fix my teaching. And probably at a lower salary too, because they felt they needed to train you after that mess. I'm a STEM student, and was looking for a job for the summer of my first year. The second interview I received was from an MLM company, which was extremely vague in what they actually do, and what my roles as an intern would be. Furthermore, the interview was conducted alongside another candidate, who was double my age, and who sold homemade jewelry. Instant red flag. Funnily enough, they never got back to me. This story is from 20 or so years ago. I worked in a parts department at a dealership. Another dealer owner called me out of the blue and wanted to talk to me, so I swing by after work. The owner says he's interested in hiring me, but as a formality I need to fill out an application. He hands me one, leaves the office to give me time to fill it out. He comes back in, we are talking as he's reading my application. First question. So tell me why it would be worth us paying you $5 an hour more than what you get paid now? That caught me off guard. I said, "Sir, you called me. I wasn't looking for a different job. This isn't going to work. Shook his hand and walked out. I did end up leaving to go to another dealership where I have worked the last 18 plus years. 2 months ago, my current owner bought the dealership from the guy who I felt insulted me. My boss doesn't know how much of a win that is for me personally that he bought them out. Long game wins out. Interviewed for a school mental health provider position. My employer would be a hospital system that would place me in a local school. I knew going into it that the salary was going to be a lowball offer, but I was fresh out of grad school so I needed to keep my options open. Lady interviewing me was really cool. I liked her a lot. Was even considering taking the job despite the crappy salary until she started explaining that on snow days, which we get maybe 5-7 in a typical year, the staff were required to come into the hospital's admin building, bring their laptops with them, and complete online trainings for 8 hours. In other words, we don't trust you to do a full 8 hours of work at home and God forbid we pay you to have a day where you aren't being fully productive because school is closed, so we will make you drive on unsafe roads, possibly in blizzard conditions, so you can come in and do BS trainings that we made explicitly for this purpose. To her credit, the lady interviewing me showed her disdain for this practice. I didn't take the job. A few years ago, I was contacted on LinkedIn by the CEO of a company in my area. He said they were hiring and wanted to bring me in for an interview. I spoke with someone else at the company, who I later learned was his spouse, and that person asked me to make a pitch deck for myself. I thought that was weird, but shrugged it off, rationalizing that they didn't know me and wanted to know more about what I'd done. I spent 4 hours that weekend making this pitch deck, and I went in for the interview that Monday. The CEO came in to interview me, and the first thing he asked me was, "Why'd you come in here today? You invited me." I already had a job and wanted to see what they could do. During the interview, it was revealed that I was interviewing to be the CEO's assistant, but that position would also support the marketing team of one person, the spouse, and act as the office manager. At this point, I felt like I wasted my time and they wasted mine. But I wanted to see if I could get an offer and use that as leverage in my current position. A week or two later, the CEO called me and offered me the job. He asked me for my number, and when I gave it, he had a high-pitched laughing fit. He later emailed me the offer, and it was much lower than my number, as well as some working condition red flags. I declined it, and then moved into another position at my then current company that paid me more than their offer. When I was young, I went to a job interview and they wouldn't say what the job was or how much it paid. They acted like it was really important and there were a bunch of people waiting. The guy said I qualified for some advanced testing, and when they got me into the next room there was an e-meter on the table and a list of questions. It was a front for Scientology and they were looking for people to work the org without being paid. I got up and left. Guaranteed you're on a database somewhere, and if you stumble into another job where the interviewer is one of them, they'll check the notes. Friend of mine sent them a single letter when we were 14, and 20 years later it still occasionally comes up. Threw away my application in front of me. Goodwill was there for community service. I was doing the equivalent work of 3 of her less motivated employees while I was there. I didn't have the heart to tell her that they were about to quit. The dude took 3 phone calls because he was getting his floor done at his new house. Then proceeded to tell me, a truck driver, that there are 2 boxes in the cab in case the truck breaks down so that we don't have to call anybody to come out and fix the truck because I should be able to fix it. I'm a pretty handy guy, so I'm all for emergency maintenance if it's easy to do. But I imagine he wanted you to be able to fix a blown transmission, lol. I was about to go for a job interview but just saw that the teachers were walking out in the news because of issues like not getting paid on time. Just did one recently that was a 4-interview process, and they wouldn't tell me about compensation until the final one. Anytime I asked, they said don't worry, that will be covered during the compensation conversation. Pretty much knew I didn't want a job by the 2nd interview, but was now morbidly curious about their pay structure. It was worse than I thought it would be. Essentially all commission based, but they tried to frame it like it wasn't. It almost seemed criminal. They said you get a base pay, but that base was them forwarding you some of your potential commission ahead of time. There were 2 other people on that Zoom call. One was coming right out of college, and so I felt an obligation to ask blunt questions in the hopes that she would see it probably wasn't a good place to start her career. I hope she found something else. LOL. I was offered a position for a touring show that I should have been unqualified for. It flew to every location and they wanted to keep my frequent flyer miles, which is unheard of. They didn't guarantee any pay rate. The schedule was incredibly variable and if I missed a single show, I would have to pay them the amount that they would have paid me, which wasn't defined in the contract and changed from show to show. If I left before 2.5 years, I'd have to work for 2 months at half rate. The previous guy quit at exactly 2.5 years. The contract had a big watermark across every page that said confidential, ignoring the typo. A contract shouldn't be confidential. I asked for several changes and they said it wasn't negotiable. I laughed and proceeded to tell everyone. They were attempting to take advantage of somebody young and gullible, because it wasn't remotely enforceable. It was also as a 1099 worker. But the requirements to work every show date not yet scheduled clearly qualifies it as a W4 position. And because I jaff, the position was working as a stage manager for Mike Super. I was interviewed to supervise staff at a small aviation service company in Central Florida. The building itself was outdated. All the technology, vending machines, coffee maker, bookkeeping, and accounting was done in a way that reminds you of a scene from a 1980s office sitcom. Concierge was handwritten on paper and separated with rubber stamps. All of their heavy service equipment were relics. We're talking 1992 being the newest vehicle. The new owners were real estate folk who had no prior aviation experience and had dreams to make their establishment the star of our airport, intending to outshine our global and regional competitors on the field. Yet they seem to be doing less than the bare minimums to meet the safety standards set by the FAA. I offered some immediate advice, as they were legitimate safety concerns. I told them the work I would have had to do to achieve their goal would have required an operations manager title with a $70K plus salary. They offered me $14.50 HR. The company isn't around anymore. Went to an interview dressed pretty nice for a construction job. Show up to said interview and they were upset I wasn't wearing work attire because apparently their interviews also include work tryouts. Like, what the frick? They kept me waiting more than 30 minutes past my interview time, during which time I could literally feel the stress and unhappiness emanating from the people working near the waiting area. I took that job because I was desperate to leave another toxic setting, but started looking for something else before the end of my first week. We had a Ms. Teams interview where the candidate on screen was lip syncing answers from someone else in the room. It was surreal. I've had some where I think they had 2 different headphones in and one was to someone off screen who was feeding answers. I won't even read resumes now, just do interviewed with whoever shows up. They told me that customers regularly verbally attack employees and asked me if I've ever been physically assaulted by a customer at a car wash. I noped out of there. We want go-getters. People who are team players and muck in, not people who will run to the union when they work an hour above their contracted hours. It's funny because that's the kind of work till you die mentality that causes unions to be formed in the first place. When I revealed that I quit my previous job in the probation period, but would you be more loyal this time? Because we are looking for people who are loyal to their company. Yes, I'm loyal if the company treats me like a human being and not like trash. Loyalty is for loved ones and pets. A job is a business transaction. I give you my time, my effort, and my skills. You give me money. That is the nature of our arrangement. After a long sales pitch, I asked the interviewer who we were meant to sell the product to. Then came a very practiced speech about how ARW loved ones want us to succeed, therefore they are the perfect ones to sell to. One Google search later, and my suspicions were confirmed. They were a MLM. Years ago I interviewed at a small private school. The principal interviewed me. I mentioned a teacher I knew who used to work there and he said, oh, I had to fire him. He couldn't control his classes. Then he proceeded to ask me how old I was, if I was married, and what church I went to. First part is tacky but not necessarily bad. Second part is illegal in the US. They asked me questions to gauge what religion I am. The job had nothing to do with religion and I'm a Christian, but that's a huge red flag. Years ago, I was asked that question outright. I told them I wasn't of their religion, that I was an accountant looking for a good job, and I don't think yours is it, and walked out. Several come to mind. This was at one company. They lost my physical job application that had crap like my SSN on it. This place was so old school that on top of the online application I had to go into their HQ and fill out the same application on paper, which they lost. Next time I showed up I had to fill it out again. Offered 0 WFH flexible hours. Half the staff had been there less than 2 years with a solid chunk having been there 6 months or less. Probably the biggest red flag, at the end of the second interview when I was basically told I was going to get an offer, the HR lady smiled to me and said, and if anything happens within your first 90 days and we have to let you go, we'll try and work something out. Not if I did anything to deserve getting canned, but if anything happened on their end. They had already done a mass layoff earlier in the pandemic. I could not have turned down that offer fast enough. As a bonus, I was asked what I wanted in terms of pay. I said mid-high 50s. Salary. They offered me $17 an hour, no salary. Frick that, lol. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.